Good morning. My name is Alex Fernandez. I'm one of the pastors here at Cornerstone and pastor here at the Heritage Hill campus. I want to welcome everybody who is here with me today, everybody who's joining online. We have communion that's going to be served at the end of the service. If you're not familiar with that, I will introduce what that means to us and invite you to participate if you're willing to do that. If you're at home, I encourage you to grab some elements and prepare to do that with us as well. We'd love to have you participate. I'll start off with a question. You don't have to raise your hand or respond out loud to this, but do you find it difficult to shut off your mind? If you're like me, that is a task that is often hard for me to do. And I didn't realize it until just a few weeks ago when I was invited by a friend of mine to a local business here in Easttown called Float. Don't know if you've ever heard of it, but he invited me to participate in an hour-long activity that is all about sensory deprivation. And I was like, what is that? He said it's just an experience where for 1 hour, what you see, what you hear, all your senses kind of go blank and you just rest. And I thought, that sounds awful to me. But he was willing to pay for it. It was on him, so he invited me to do that. And so I hadn't seen him in a while. And he's actually on sabbatical. He's a pastor, and during these 3 months, he's been doing a lot of different things. But he sees this as a spiritual experience. And so he invited me to participate. If you don't know anything about it, I guess the way that I would describe it is if you've ever been to a tanning booth, you get into a tanning bed and you kind of close the cover of the tanning bed. It's similar to that. This tank was kind of egg-shaped. I'm going to say close to the size of the carpet up here in terms of width and length. It's wide enough that you can't touch the sides if you put your arms out. It's long enough that you can stretch yourself out completely from head to toe and not touch the sides. Obviously, if you move in the tank, you can touch those. But there's water about 10 inches deep in there, and it's incredibly It's filled with Epsom salt. So much so, like the Dead Sea. I've been to the Dead Sea in Israel. The Dead Sea is one of the most fascinating places on earth because when you get into the Dead Sea, you literally cannot sink. There's so much salt in the water that you're buoyant. And so they put so much Epsom salt in this tank that you actually float. You can touch the bottom. Obviously, when you get in, it's not like but when you lay back, your body is floating on top of the water. And so, you get in, you go in the room, you have your own private room, you take a shower, you get all the chemicals off your body, you get in all your glory, and you get in this tank, and then you close the shell, okay? And if for those of you who are claustrophobic, you're probably thinking that's, what is there air? Is there oxygen in it? Yes. I mean, you can see light around the tank. But then the lights go out in the room. You have some controls on the side that control the light inside the shell. There's music if you want to play music, but they encourage you to put in earplugs and just float. There's a little tube that you put on the back of your head if you want. If you're worried that your head's going to go underwater, you won't, and you just float. The temperature of the air in the room and the water in the room dials in to be the exact temperature of your body. So although you can feel the water, you don't recognize, how you get in a pool and sometimes the air is cooler. There's no difference in the temperature. When the lights go out, it's pitch black. Guys, I'm saying it's so dark that there were many times where I opened my eyes as wide as I could, and then I shut them, and there was no difference. The only thing that you hear if you wear the headphones is your breathing and your thoughts. It is one of the most uncomfortable, bizarre experiences, and also relaxing and rejuvenating that I've ever experienced. I'll be honest, you're in there for 1 hour, And for the first 40 minutes, you don't realize how many thoughts are going into your head until you're in a situation like that. I mean, I recognized instantly how much my mind races. Obviously, I was just trying to get used to my surroundings. He actually warned me of that. He's like, the first half of the time, you're going to be in there and you're going to be freaking out. Is my head going to go underwater? What time will the lights go on? What if I fall asleep? Will I be in here for 3 days? Like, all those thoughts are playing inside your head. But then you start to think about the things that are playing in repetition in the back of your subconscious. Those things that you worry about, those things that you're constantly thinking about, the work that you have to do. I mean, all those things, and you quickly realize how much your mind is working even though it doesn't feel like it. And so I would say then there's no clock. You know, in a tanning bed, have you ever done a tanning bed? Sometimes they have the clock in there and you can peek and you're like, I've got 2 minutes and 40 seconds left. You don't have any concept of the time that you're in there. And I would estimate that probably for the first 40 minutes, I was trying to just grasp my surroundings and my mind was racing, you know, where's the side, you know, and every once in a while, when I was finally relaxed, I'd bump into the side, kind of like in a pool when you think you're in the center of the pool and you bump into the side and you realize you floated like 10 feet. Maybe for the last 10 minutes, for the next 10 minutes, my mind shifted to the things that were important to me. It was interesting that once I got through and recognized, like, I'm safe, there's nothing weird that's going to happen. It's interesting the thoughts that came to the front of my mind. My family, what I can do to become healthier, the things that I value. I don't know that I ever got to the point of full relaxation, except to the point where I know we've all experienced this before, where you've fallen asleep and you startle yourself because you've realized I just fell asleep for a second. It was a fascinating experience. I would encourage somebody to try it. I mean, I wanted to go back and do it because he said the first time is not the entire experience. It's once you know your surroundings that you allow yourself to go to a place that you truly find rest. He described it as being in the belly of the whale and you're Jonah. I kind of get that. Bizarre. I mean, for a while there, I mean, I was like, I'm floating. Like, I forgot I was in, like, this is what it must feel like in space. Well, I mean, those are the things that I was thinking about. Welcome to week 2 of our series, The Other 167. This is a series that we have built 5 weeks around defining what worship is. And the title is a little bit confusing because when you call it something like that, you have to explain it a little bit. What's the other 167? What's the one? The 168 is the number of hours we have in a week. And so much of the time, when it comes to spirituality and we think about worship, we think about this. We think about coming together for an hour or so and offering our worship to God through song, through prayer, through scripture and all that kind of stuff. And that's not to discount the gathering. We talked about that actually last week, that there is a specific purpose behind gathering that is an important part of worship, but it is not the end of our worship. It is the beginning. It is intended to be the springboard to ignite the other 167 hours of our lives. When we think about worship, you've probably seen the analogy at some point. We used it here years ago. Francis Chan used a rope to describe your life, and he had a really long rope, and it like went out of the worship center. We actually did it here, went down the staircase, and he kind of illustrated like our life here on earth is but a moment in time. But if you think about this rope and you think about eternity, there's so much more eternity than there is in my life. And so I was thinking about this week, and I have this rope, and if this rope represented a week, this is about 36 inches long, it's 3 feet long. If this represented our week, our 168 hours, Our 1 hour of gathering, if you can see this little red spot right here is how much of our week this hour represents. This tiny, tiny little portion right here is how much 1 hour of our week represents. It is 0.5% of our week, if you do the math. And so there is so much more that is a part of our week that this cannot possibly be the beginning and the end of our worship if we want it to be meaningful, right? If you put 0.5% of your time into work, you'd probably not be employed very long. If you put 0.5% effort into your education, you probably wouldn't do great in school. If you put 0.5% into a hobby that you wanted to learn, it would probably take you a lifetime to learn that craft, right? But I also want to caution us that the other 167, when we talk about this, we're not talking about counting the hours of worship that we do during the week. This is not a series where we're talking about the checklist of all the things that we need to accomplish in the 168 to make it worship. The point is not to fill all of the 167 and compartmentalize the types of worship, but it's encourage us all to think about everything that we do, wherever we are, however we engage with others, wherever our mind is, whatever we do, that it is all an opportunity for worship. And I think one of the greatest challenges that we have, especially culturally today, is that we live in a society that values productivity. We live in a society that rewards effort and accomplishment. Sometimes we wear it as a badge of honor. We will work ourselves to the ground and work ourselves into nothing to gain the approval of others or to accomplish something. And if we do that in those parts of our lives, often it transfers into our psyche and we begin to think, if I don't do this, it will not get done. But I have found that one of the best ways to worship is when we slow down. I'm going to introduce to you a dirty word in church. I got you now. And that word is Sabbath. The word Sabbath is one of those words in church life and spiritual experience that we often choose to ignore. Part of it is because we don't understand it. I think a lot of it has to do with how we've experienced it or how it's been taught to us. How many of you grew up in West Michigan as your home? All right, I grew up in West Michigan. I hated Sabbath growing up. I grew up in a small little community where Sabbath meant, as a kid, you're not allowed to play outside. I was talking to some other people in the church, part of our teaching team, and we were talking about our church experience and Sabbath growing up for those of us who grew up in West Michigan. If you didn't grow up in West Michigan, count your blessings. We were talking, like some people said, I was allowed to play outside, but I couldn't go into a neighbor's yard. Another person said, my family, we were allowed to play catch in the yard, but nobody could bat. That was the definition of work. Many of us probably heard this, but it was real in my community. Like, you could not mow your lawn on Sunday. Shame, shame, shame if you were caught doing any sort of type of work on Sunday. And so as a kid, I grew up with a very distorted view of Sabbath. For me, it felt like punishment. For me, it felt like you just need to be inside. Now, I am convinced, growing in my town, nobody observed Sabbath. Everybody was just inside doing whatever they wanted to do so that nobody else would see what they were actually doing. And I've grown to realize that what was presented to me about Sabbath and rest was strikingly different than what God intended. And to understand that, can I take us back in history all the way back to the beginning? In Genesis chapter 1, we get the creation story. And we get this image of God and a story that helps us understand the character and the nature of God and a narrative about how things came to be. I've said this 1,000 times. Don't get caught up in the number of days. Don't get caught up in like the what came before what. It is a narrative for us to understand that there is a creator, and that creator created all things, and that creator created me and knows me. That's what we should glean out of that. But in Genesis chapter 2, it starts off like this, and this is the introduction about rest and Sabbath. It says, after the creation, it says, thus the heavens and the earth were completed in all their vast array. And by the seventh day, God had finished the work he had been doing. So on the seventh day, he rested from all the work. Then God blessed the seventh day and made it holy, because on it he rested for all the work of creating that he had done. Now that passage alone brings all sorts of theological questions. Like if God is all-knowing, all-powerful, ever-present, ever-being, everlasting, does God really need to rest? Or is this revealing the character of God and giving us a narrative for us to understand that there is a healthy rhythm of rest that is good? Now, we don't have to be convinced that rest is good. We all enjoy a full night's sleep if you can get it. We all enjoy going on vacation. Who doesn't love a day off from work? Who doesn't like calling in sick when you're not really? No, I'm kidding. We don't have to be convinced that rest is good. But can rest be worship? And if so, how? And if so, why? To understand the context of Sabbath, I'm going to take you briefly to Exodus chapter 20. This text is found in a couple different parts of the Bible in the Old Testament, both Exodus and Deuteronomy. But this text specifically helps us understand a little bit more about Sabbath. It says, remember the Sabbath day by keeping it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it you should not do any work, neither you or your son or your daughter, your male or your female servant, your animals, your foreigner residing in your towns. For in 6 days the Lord is calling back to what God did. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea, and all that is in them, but he rested on the seventh day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and made it holy. Same words as found in Genesis chapter 2. If you're not familiar with these words, this is the fourth commandment of the 10 commandments. And I've often liked the explanation of the 10 commandments this way. The first four of the 10 commandments are our relationship with God, the vertical relationship with God, the things, how we should honor God and what things don't honor God in that way. And the other 6 are in our relationship with others. How do I treat people? What should I not do to harm people? Those are basically the 10 commandments in my relationship. But the first 4 are really about worship. 3 of them are the do nots. Don't have any other gods. Don't make any idols. But this one is a little bit different because it's about rest. And it's not a do not like all the others. Like all the others are do not lie, do not covet, do not do harm to other people, do not have idols. This one actually is a commandment to do something, and it's to rest. And this one is different than all the others because this one has added explanation to it. Almost as if we need an explanation to try to understand it because we don't get it. And so it's a much longer text. It's like 3 verses to explain this commandment. And to understand where this commandment and the context of this commandment comes from, these are the laws given to Moses at the time when Israel was freed from oppression from the Egyptian slavery. Moses led the Egyptians out of slavery after 400 years of captivity with the help of God, or actually God doing the work. And Moses led them out of there. But for centuries, the Israelite people were enslaved to the Egyptians, and all they knew was work, 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 work. And so God freed them physically as slaves, and then he gave them this commandment to free them mentally from the oppression that they had been governed over. And so God made the Sabbath. He made it a commandment as a remembrance of what they had experienced, as a remembrance of their view of the world, both physically and mentally. God was saying, remember that you were slaves. Remember that I was your salvation and I'm the one who freed you. And if you want to honor me through rest. Because rest is a gift. I had a paradigm shifting experience in 2017 when it came to Sabbath. I had an opportunity to travel to the Holy Land, Israel, in 2017 with Pastor Marcus. He and I went with a group of 26 other pastors from around the country. We didn't know anybody. It was a fascinating trip. I've been to Israel more than once. But this trip just stood out, and this specific concept really brought renewal to me, because on that trip, as we traveled through the Holy Land, we found ourselves in Jerusalem on Friday. Now, the Sabbath is called the Shabbat in Israel. That's the Hebrew word for Sabbath, Shabbat. And we found ourselves in Israel on the Shabbat in Jerusalem. And the Shabbat begins at 6 p.m., sundown, for 24 hours until the next day, sundown. That's the Shabbat. And as we were in Israel, touring the city, now this is a city of about 1 million people. Think Atlanta, Detroit, like a metropolis. There was a frenzy in the city that I had not seen before. There was people everywhere, like you would go into a downtown marketplace, but there was something happening in the marketplace where people from all around the city were in the market grabbing the food, and you could hear the buzz. There was just an energy and just an excitement almost that was filling all of Jerusalem. And what they were doing is they were gathering their food for the Shabbat meal that was going to begin in the evening. And this frenzy happened all afternoon long. And as we were touring Jerusalem, when 6 o'clock hit, it was fascinating to see a city this size just slow down. Imagine if that happened in our culture. I mean, there were cars on the road because not everybody in Israel observes the Shabbat. But it wasn't a busy city buzz. People were out walking their dog. It's like a hush came over the city. And then we walked over from the city square, and we were invited to go over to a man's house for dinner. And so 28 of us shoved ourselves into a tiny little one-bedroom apartment, and 28 of us had a meal that the family had prepared. And throughout that meal, the host was explaining to us the meaning of the Shabbat. He was taking us through, like, where does this come from? And he helped us understand the story of Moses and the slave, and he explained the songs that they sang and the customs that they have, but the meaning of it. Later on, much later, we wanted to observe it. We weren't taking notes. There was no recording. We had our cell phones off. We were just listening. And later on in the evening, we found out he was a rabbi. And he was teaching. We were learning about the Shabbat from a rabbi. And the thing that stood out to me the most was that he explained the Shabbat as something they long for. That it's something they get to do. That the buzz that we saw in the city was all about the excitement because of the rest that they were given permission to experience. This was foreign to me. And it forever shaped my view of Sabbath. I'd always seen Sabbath as a punishment. This was a paradigm breaker for me. And I came back from the trip and I tried to explain to Beth Ann that I wanted rest to be something that I longed for. And we committed to try to build in a rhythm of rest in our life. My Sabbath comes on Friday. I work on Sundays. Sunday's not my day of rest. But we have carved out in our week where Friday, we try to make Friday a day where we slow down. And this is an instruction. I mean, like, I know many of you are probably like, I've got my notes. Tell me what I can and can't do on the Sabbath. I'm not telling you that I have the book of all the rules of what you can and can't do, but I'll tell you this. On Fridays, we try to sleep in as long as we can. On Fridays, we may go out to breakfast and have a late brunch. We both enjoy movies. We might take a movie in at the end of somewhere in our day. My encouragement for you on your Sabbath is think about the things that drain you and give you life. We'll get into the keys of Sabbath here in a second, but I have brought back since 2017 and tried to bring in a model of rest in my week where I don't answer emails, where I don't work on that day, where I just slow down my pace of life, and it has changed both my heart and my mind, but it has helped me mentally to slow down. And for the people who are listening here this morning, I know some of you might be saying, well, if I enjoy it, can it be worship? Or how is that kind of rest honoring to God? And I will tell you that is the legalism that many of you have been programmed in here if you grew up in this culture, but it's actually human nature to believe that kind of stuff. Jesus actually experienced this kind of persecution. In John chapter 9, Jesus, of all the things that he upset the Pharisees and the religious teachers of all things, his observance of the Sabbath was one of the things that often drew their greatest ire. One day Jesus is in the temple and he healed a man. And the response from the Pharisees was this in John 9:16. Some of the Pharisees said, "This man is not from God, for he does not keep the Sabbath." Sounds like people from my hometown. They had a perspective of what the Sabbath was, and it was not to do work, even if the work was good. But before we persecute the Pharisees, might I say that we don't do this to ourselves? That we often don't give ourselves permission to slow down, to rest. Another time in Mark chapter 2, Jesus caught the ire of other religious teachers because his disciples grabbed some wheat because they were hungry as they were walking through the field, and they ate the wheat, and they called into question Jesus's and his disciples' observance of the Sabbath. So much to the extreme that eating some wheat might call it into question. And Jesus' response is, you're missing the point. He said, the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. Because rest is a gift from God. And somewhere along the way, I think we have lost our trust that God knows what's best for us. Along the way, many of us have developed a view of God, that God and his rules and his laws are around catching us in to catch us in our disobedience. That God's rules are to restrict us from doing things we enjoy. But God's laws, God's observances, God's commandments are like guardrails to protect us. to protect the others around us, but also to protect us from ourselves. God made the Sabbath so that we can find rest. Back in the beginning of creation, back in the time of Jesus, back in our time, in a world that celebrates results. He gives us the Sabbath as a gift to counter the world's culture that wants to celebrate results and productivity. But when we rest, we can worship. Because my rhythm of rest tells God I trust him. It kind of reminds me of the series that we did at the beginning of the year. For those of you who were with us, we did a series at the beginning of the year, and we focused on the book of Genesis, not all of Genesis, but parts of the story of the book of Genesis, and we called the series More to the Story. And in week 1 of that series, we introduced the concept of the trees, 2 trees. And the 2 trees are the trees that are found in the Genesis story, the tree of life and the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And in that series, we renamed those trees as the trees of independence or the tree of partnership. Because this is the challenge that we face when in our spiritual journey. Do I want independence? Meaning, do I want to make every decision for myself? Do I want to have the right to do what I feel like when I want to feel like it? Or do I trust that partnering with God is going to give me a life that is more fruitful, more I find more enjoyment in, is going to give me a life of contentment that this other tree will not provide? That was the tension in that series. Do I trust my ways, or do I trust that God is wiser? Do I trust that God is going to provide for me in some direction that is healthier? And if so, will I choose to partner with God? And when it comes to Sabbath, do I trust God that a rhythm of rest is good? I shared with you what my experience was in 2017, but I will tell you in 2024, I experienced a season of spiritual dryness. It was about October of last year, and there's a lot of reasons for that. Our family has been through a lot, and I've shared some of those things. But I found myself in a season of spiritual dryness. Many of the reasons I would have justified by saying I had a lot of why God moments for what was happening to my daughter and some of the health concerns that she went through. But I found myself trying to serve and care for others on an empty tank. I found myself in a rhythm that I had allowed the busyness of work and life to creep into my rhythm of rest. I was trying to answer every email, no matter when they came. I was responding to every text as soon as I got it. I was picking up every phone call as soon as it came in. I was not shutting off my brain for work and other things that were going on in my life. And that period of life allowed a creep into my spiritual rhythm. I can look and say, was I resting in that period of time? Not was I taking a day off. Was I slowing down to rest? And I tried to build in that habit of rest again. I mean, one of the biggest culprits of our lack of rest are these things. There's actually a setting on here. I put it on my phone of when my Sabbath starts. There's settings in your phone to help protect you from yourselves, and I actually took some steps to not allow this to enslave me as much as it had been doing, because I found myself longing and wanting rest. Have you ever felt like that? And so here's my challenge for you today. My challenge for you is to carve out a day of rest. If carving out a day of rest is too daunting, carve out a half a day of rest. If still that's too much, start with 8 hours of rest. Carve out a rhythm that you're going to say, I'm going to intentionally slow down from this period and rest. Figure out what you're going to do in that time or not do in that time. I can't tell you what your Sabbath is going to look like, but if you work it with your hands throughout the rest of your other 168, maybe it's putting your hands to rest and doing something that'll challenge your mind. If you use your mind mostly throughout your week, maybe it's something you're doing with your hands. If it's a hobby, dive into that hobby. But here's the key that I told you about. This is what makes it a Sabbath or not. What you do is not as important as where your focus is during that time. We've talked about things like fasting before. And I've said fasting without prayer is called a diet, okay? If you're not praying during fasting, if there's not a purpose behind what you're fasting about, you're just dieting. Rest without intentional focus is just a day off. One of the things I love to do, probably because I was told that you can't do this on Sunday, is I love to mow my lawn on my Sabbath. I Sabbath while I mow my lawn. I've got a 2-acre lawn. It's a pain to keep. It takes me about 2 hours on my riding mower, but there is no greater time in my week that I am in prayer than during those 2 hours. It is my intentional time. My neighbors probably think I'm crazy because my lips are moving and there's no headphones on. But that is and I mow my lawn with my eyes open. By the way, you can pray with your eyes open. Okay? If you want straight lines, that's how you do it. But that is my intentional time with God because my focus during that time are the things that I think about when I'm in that float tank. What's important to me? Where is my burden right now? God, this is where I need to trust you more. It's not a continuous prayer, but that's where my focus is. When I mow my lawn, I think this is my time with God. You can take a walk and slow down your pace and it be Sabbath by taking a look at the creation around you and seeing the beauty around you and being reminded of God's great creative power. If you go to the beach today, if that's in your plans, you can Sabbath on that day at the beach by looking at the grains of the sand in the ground and seeing how tiny they are and realizing that I am but a speck in this world, yet this God, the creator who made the sand and made me, knows me personally. It could be an act of worship, remembrance. If it's a hobby, you can pour into it, doing the things that you love, recognizing that God has gifted you with this and giving praise and thanksgiving for the things that bring you enjoyment in your life. You can find rest in what you do when we admire, when we praise, when we trust God. And so my encouragement and my challenge to you is slow down, enjoy life, and remember God. Let me leave you with this. This is how important God considers rest. It's going to blow your mind. Think about this. Think about this for a second. When we think about the creation story, God created all things in 6 days, right? What did he create on day 6? He created humanity. He created all the things in all of creation. And the last thing that God created, according to the creation story, whenever it happened, whether it was day 6, it was year, whatever it was, whatever God created, the last thing God created was man. And in the creation story, God says, you will have dominion over this. I have given this for you to enjoy. This is for you. You're going to be in charge of it. I'm going to partner with you in this. You're not going to get bored. Trust me, there is tons of things to do in all of this creation. But what was the first thing that God gave man after the creation on day 6? Rest. That's how important God thinks rest is. That he created and he waited to create humanity. And the first task he gave us is to slow down. This is what Jesus says about rest. He says, come to me. all who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light. Jesus is saying, I am your rest. And so I know you, some of you, and probably all of you are sitting out there are experiencing tiredness. I don't know that I talk to anybody who says I'm not tired, or that I'm running on empty, or that I'm exhausted, or I've got this thing going on in my life and I'm burdened. And what Jesus says in that, he says, come to me. I am your Sabbath. Focus on me. Build into your life a rhythm of me, and you will find rest. I will lift up your burden if you trust me. My rhythm of rest tells God I trust him. The world will try to tell you different. The world will try to give you your identity by what you do and what you accomplish. The world will try to tell you you're a worthy parent or a worthy spouse by how much you do. But God says, you will find rest in me. And your purest act of worship to me this week just might be offering me rest and focus on me. So today we're going to end with a time of communion. And communion is a sacrament that we celebrate in this church. Sacrament just means simply a sacred thing, and it's what we do in remembrance of what Christ, Jesus, has done on our behalf. That through his death and resurrection, we are not only offered eternal life, but we are offered rest and peace in the midst of our chaos. And so in a moment, you'll be invited to come forward. We'll have communion servers. There's several options here for you. There's bread and juice. If you want to choose that way, they'll give you the bread and you dip it in the cup. There's cups up here if that's not your thing. There's some that are gluten-free, others that are not. You can receive it that way. The point in your walk forward here today is to lift up your heart. And may this walk forward be an opportunity as an act of worship in your pursuit of rest that you will find in Christ. Because it was on a night that Jesus was betrayed, that he gave himself up, and he had one final meal with his closest of friends. And it was during that meal that he took the bread off the table, broke it, and gave thanks and said, this is my body broken and given to you. Take and eat. And it was likewise later in the meal that he took the cup off the table, lifted it up, gave thanks, and said, this is my blood of the new covenant poured out for many for the forgiveness of sins. As long as you gather, take, drink, remember, and believe. And so, Lord, we come to you and we humble ourselves. In a world of productivity, Lord, you love us when we are still. And so, Lord, may our act of worship today be a time of rest, bringing to you what makes us weary, bringing to you what stresses us, bringing to you what burdens us. And Lord, may you help us build a rhythm of rest somewhere in our week, that we might carve out some time to renew, to refresh. But Lord, most importantly, to prove to you in our act of worship that we trust you. May these elements do a spiritual renewal inside us, pierce our hearts, renew our minds. Lord, may today be an offering and a beginning step towards the rest and the gift that you provide. We believe you came. We believe you died. We believe you rose. We believe you are coming again. May our lives be a representation of that in our stillness. We dedicate this day to you. It's in your name we pray. Amen. You may come forward as you feel led.